We have a lot to say. We really do. So on today's episode, we are revisiting family roles. This was something we talked about back on episode 18. But since we are once again in the holiday season, like, hello, well, how does this happen every single year? We thought that it would be a good time to revisit this topic, especially because we feel that knowing where you may fall in the family roles, or if you're noticing these patterns, may help you with setting your intentions, purpose, and meaning in how you want to be and how you want to show up in these spaces.
And if you're thinking to yourself, like, what do you mean by family roles? Just take a moment before, to just kind of reflect on who you are. Does who you are change as soon as you walk in through the front door of your family's house? If it does, this is what we're going to be speaking to today, and a little bit more in depth in terms of just setting those boundaries and setting those intentions of what you want your interactions to be like this holiday season. And I know that establishing boundaries is something that City has been wanting to talk about for a minute. Why is it so important to you?
I think boundaries are one of the keys to life. Like, I think a big part of it is choice, but also your boundaries and your thought process. Like, those things are really big for me. And really that part of getting into the choice of what you're doing with these boundaries and really how boundaries develop. Like, I know for myself, when I started putting in boundaries, we're in places where I felt the safest. And it's just really interesting to see how that develops. And then it's like, wait, like, everything is a choice. Like, choices and boundaries are so intertwined in my mind that I think that they're super important, that we need to be talking about all the time.
Well, we're actually introduced to boundaries at a really young age, whether we're aware of this or not. So if you are in a home where healthy boundaries are observed, you basically have the ability to develop close and meaningful relationships and feel safe and secure in sharing your feelings. If you observed unhealthy boundaries as a child, you are often distrusting in relationships and you're afraid to get close. So as I was kind of preparing my show notes for this episode, I found a interesting article written by Dr. Gary Gittles. I hope I'm saying his last name right. He's a licensed clinical counselor, and he wrote that families basically fall on a boundary spectrum. And so on one end of the spectrum, you have enmeshed families. Heyo, that's me. If you remember, City was so kind to point out that I was a member of an enmeshed family, and I was like, what the hell is that?
That'll be $80 for that free therapy session. You're welcome.
So basically, in short, enmeshed families have no boundaries between family members. We often overshare information, and we're in each other's business constantly. Family members are fused together by unhealthy emotions, and some may even consider it as smothering. There's absolutely no autonomy between individuals, and it's actually discouraged. And if you are not an immediate family member, you are basically considered an outsider. All right, so that's on one end of the spectrum. Now, the opposite end of the spectrum, completely from enmeshed, is disengaged. And actually, this is kind of made me think of you, Cydia.
Okay.
So disengaged families are actually mutually withdrawn from one another, both psychologically and emotionally. They share little to nothing with family members and have no communication, or very little. They have no knowledge of what the other person is going through and are often described as detached. The family patterns and behaviors that are exhibited do not offer effective support and guidance. What do you think?
That doesn't sound like my nuclear family at all. I mean, my parents are not authorities on anything, especially not relationships. And our siblings, we all live very different lives. Although I think we're trying to, I'm certainly trying to bridge more gaps with my brothers and spending time with them and getting to know them and their kids and all of that kind of stuff. But overall, we are very separate. But it's interesting because that's this nuclear family that's here in the U.S. So my parents and my brothers. The rest of their families seem to fall somewhere in between, because I think my mom's family is an enmeshed family. They hate outsiders. Like, in-laws have a really hard time in that family. And it's a very clear divide. Like, you're of our blood, you are in the family. If if you are not of our blood, they like will put people out, and to the point where like they even do it to children. And it's really sucks because I have my oldest brother, he has 3 daughters. One of them is his wife's first daughter, so he's not the biological dad. And then he had a daughter with her. So they're I think they're about 3 or 4 years apart. And the way that they talk about this other child, it's like, well, she's crazy, like she's unmanageable, like she's all this and that. And I think she's actually very bright. I think she's a very smart young woman. Not young woman, she's a little thing. She's like 12 or 13. But the things that I've heard family members say just shocks me. But it goes back to this enmeshed family. Well, she's not really part of the family, even though like he's married to her, he's raising her, like she's clearly a part of his family, but she's not blood. And so I feel like that's a big line that's drawn for that side of the family. Here, I don't give a fuck. I don't care if you're blood or not. And my family I choose is so much stronger for me than these other ones, especially because when we do get to talking about those family roles, and I do think we probably need to re-talk about those just for a minute, of what those are for any of our new listeners. Hi guys, we like you. Heyo. So you could see all these different things, but yes. So what's in between the disengaged and the enmeshed families?
So real quick though, you might think like, okay, well, is one better than the other? No. So both having an enmeshed family like mine or a disengaged family like yours are both problematic and actually prevent healthy boundaries from emerging. So you had talked about I think your mother's side of the family being in the middle. So in the middle is what's considered a balance.
Oh, no, they're enmeshed. In the middle, I don't know who's in the middle.
Okay. So if you're in the middle of the spectrum, you have balanced families, and that basically consists of a healthy balance of engagement and autonomy for the individual in the family. Family members can express their own thoughts and feelings without others making assumptions or getting angry or jealous, and they can share their feelings in a comfortable and safe space that has been created by their family. So, listeners, I think when we're talking about this spectrum, I think, we're thinking of our family as a whole, but I think, looking at individual family members, where on this spectrum do you fall with certain family members? Like I would say with my mother, I'm more of like on the enmeshed side. With my father, I'm probably a little bit more in the disengaged. So how can you start to create boundaries individually with people to work towards that middle of having that balance between engagement and autonomy with your family members?
That's really interesting because it depends. And I guess it also assumes that you want to engage with these people, because if it was super toxic growing up, like I am not at all surprised that my brothers have actively decided like, peace out, we are disengaging, we don't want to have anything to do with our nuclear family, and they're keeping our parents at a distance more than anything. Because I've kind of done that too, like, nope, like here's the line, here's the boundary, here's the wall. And it's really interesting that I think one of the first things I did with my therapist was, I don't know if you've done this technique. So basically what they do is it's like therapy that they do with kids. And so it's like a sandbox. So it's Sandbox Therapy, and they ask you a question and they go, okay, well, what's your life like? And I went through and all these little figurines, and I made my little house, and I made my family and like my interests and other things. And I had literally like trees and walls and distance that I physically put into the sandbox of like, here's my life and those are my parents. Like, and now that like that distance is still there, but I'm trying to work on at least one relationship right now, right? The relationship with my dad that I've been talking to him about. But it was a very clear physical manifestation of just like, wow, this is really interesting that you feel you have all these things, but yet there was a clear wall. I'll have to see if it's on, I think it's on my phone somewhere. I can find it and you guys can see the inside of my head.
But you talk about yourself as an adult. Let's go back to us as children. And this is kind of where we can reintroduce or briefly talk about the roles. So we have this talk about boundaries, but boundaries is closely linked to those family roles that we have. What was your family roles, or do you mind sharing real quick with the new listeners what those roles are?
Yes. So the family roles, and these emerge mostly in some sort of dysfunctional family, possibly with addiction, more likely with addiction. So the different roles that we have are, we have the scapegoat. That's usually like a problem child of some kind. They're the ones that is basically being blamed for everything. There's the victim. They're usually the person who has the problem of some kind, whether that's alcohol, drugs, some other dependency issues. Then you will have the chief enabler who actually helps them and doesn't necessarily want to recognize that that's what they're doing. You have the mascot, who is the family comedian and will diffuse pressure off of the victim, and is a way to get, lighten the mood, right? And that there is going to be that person. Then there's the lost child. If you have that many kids, there can be a lost child in there, which is, they're really quiet. They're more attached to things rather than people. And this person basically is like, I'm just going to be so low under the radar that nobody is going to pay any attention to me. And that strategy works for them. And then finally, the family role of the hero. And that family hero basically is what it sounds like. They come in, they swoop in, they're able to be maybe the parent if that's what's needed, but they're the grown-up in the family. And so I ended with the family roles because that is the role that my family definitely loves to have me in. And I am pushing back on that a lot because I'm not Captain Save-A-Ho. I'm just not, and I'm not going to do that. And so I'm not playing into that. But they keep trying to drag me in.
Well, and I think that it's important. So as I was like re-listening to the family roles episode, I was thinking to myself, like, gosh, why didn't I just start to establish boundaries even then? But I think that as children, you don't have that luxury oftentimes if you're coming from dysfunctional families, whether it's enmeshed or disengaged. And so we weren't allowed to do that. I identified, or I should say, was identified by my family as both the caretaker and the hero. I stepped in when I needed to. I was a parentified child, all of that stuff. And as I got older, I became more aware of the fact that, wow, I'm feeling really drained of energy and I'm actually doing more harm than good, because by coming in and solving the problems that, my family was experiencing, they weren't able to troubleshoot or take accountability, responsibility for the things that were happening in their life. So I started to establish boundaries. But I've found though that I don't think, because boundaries are on a spectrum, I don't think that they're set in stone.
I don't think they're set in stone. I think that you kind of figure out where they are and then you go, well, shit, that doesn't work for me. Or you know what, that works really well for me.
I also think in times of crisis, or times of despair, and like kind of what's surfacing for me at the moment is my brother Megan, who is a previous guest on the show, trans man. He just had his first surgery for his top surgery. And, my mother, I'm observing her. So Megan flew out to Las Vegas and was staying with my mother and I as he's getting this procedure done. And so my mom exhibits extreme signs of distress, but won't ask for help. And like I've noticed, she's having a lack of sleep. She's constantly fidgeting, and she bounces her leg out of like nervousness or anxiety. So I offered to kind of step in and figure out, okay, well, these are the things we're going to do. I kind of took charge of the situation because, one, I'm very comfortable with that role, but I also saw that it was needed. Would I consider myself staying there? No, because everybody's adults in the situation. But I looked at the situation and, took charge. But now I also feel comfortable stepping out of that role if needed, as Megan heals and stuff like that.
Well, let me ask you this, because I know that outside of my house is your car and that you have groceries to take over to your mom and Megan, because you're like, I don't know what they eat. I don't know what they have these things. Is that you being helpful, or is that you sweeping in to be a caretaker?
No. Okay. That is 100% all my food. I know that I walked in your house with like 5 bags, but that is all my food. So
well, I just want to make
I'm
sure.
looking out for me.
And I want to make sure, because I would say the same thing goes with our with our podcast conference, like you were very much like a caretaker, and it was really interesting to see. And I was like, okay, is this Melissa, or is this Melissa being the caretaker, or is this Melissa being hungry? Like, I don't know.
No, I'm always, y'all, I always have food on me, on my person at all times, because I don't know why. I don't know why, but if you ask me, hey, do you have something on you that I could eat? I probably have like a cheese stick or fucking trail mix or something. But I mean, I don't know. That's just always been me. But just in this experience with Megan, though, I, went above and beyond what I normally do, because I'm a nice person, regardless of what Sidious says. And I'm very, I'm very generous, and I will go above and beyond for someone, especially if I feel like it will be reciprocated, or at least well received and appreciated. I think that that's what's most important. Growing up, though, my efforts weren't always appreciated. Very rarely were they. And I think that that was just what depleted me. But, so that's something that I'm stepping in. But for you, though, you've had situations recently where your family members have been trying to pull you back in. Yes.
They definitely try to have those moments. And so I have helped out one of my brothers locally, because during the pandemic, he was trying to get a place and wasn't able to, and he needed some help. And it's not something I would normally help out with, but I'm leasing a house in North Las Vegas is basically what's happening. And I told Matt about it. Matt was not happy, because he's very much, you do what you got to do for yourself, but we're all grown-ups and you have to figure it out, which I don't necessarily disagree with. But in this situation, I could feel the tension, and I could feel my brother, like, the fact that he'd even reached out to me. He reached out because he had a problem with getting scammed for his deposit for a potential rental. And so he didn't know what to do. And I called him up. I was like, hey, tell me more about this. And I've never heard him like this. Like, he was just so distraught, thinking that he was going to have to break up his family, send his, his partner and daughter to Arizona while he figured out, how to live. And it was like, I could see the effort that he was putting in. So in that sense, I didn't mind being the family hero, because I felt like I'm not saving you so much as I'm helping you, and I see all the effort that you're putting in. So that's one example, right? But the way that I got wrapped into it recently was I was at the airport, and my oldest brother, he called me. We were texting back and forth on WhatsApp, and when you can tell that somebody's like definitely on their phone, so he goes ahead and calls me. Rude. Don't do that. Let's stick to the texting, okay? So he does that, and then I could tell he was very intoxicated, and he basically asked me to raise one of his daughters, to bring her here to the United States. And I was like, whoa, like, first of all, like, that is a really big ask. I can't say yes to that without talking to my partner about that. Like, hey, by the way, like,
we're getting a kid.
We're getting a kid.
It's not like a puppy.
Yeah. Well, and then it was like, you can't just give her to me either. Like, she's not a car. She's not your possession, which I definitely had issues with. But, so there were all kinds of things that were involved in that. But he was like, well, you're in charge of the family. And I was like, no, I'm not. He's like, yeah, you are. And everybody looks to you for what to do. Like, you're in charge. I was like, no, I'm not. And I actively rejected it. And I ended up doing some tapping at the airport. And so I don't know if our listeners are familiar with that. So there's this technique called the emotional freedom technique. And basically you can tap on meridian points, or you can tap on the fleshy part of your hand and then do it like a karate chop. And basically it's a way to do affirmations or do some other things. And I realized, like, this isn't my energy. This isn't me. I'm not taking on what he wants me to take on, which is, this huge responsibility of raising one of my nieces. And I was really proud of myself because I did not internalize it, and I did not feel really guilty, because I feel like a different version of myself would have been like super guilty, like, oh my God, I'm letting my family down. Like, this is the worst thing ever. Let me see what I can do, figure it out. And I would have gone into this problem solving mode that I'm very good at, because that's what I've done for a very long time. But I did not do it in this instance. I was like, nope, I'm not doing this. This is not my role. I know that's what you want me to do, but that's not enough of a reason for me to do it.
That's exciting. Just listening into both of our stories, it really sounds like, okay, these situations, these things out of our control surfaced, and we actually made the conscious decision or intention to like not get involved, or if we did get involved, to something that we were comfortable with.
Yes, everything to your own comfort level. And I think that that's really the thing with these boundaries is, when my therapist was asking me, well, do you really want to have this big of a wall with your parents? I was like, yup, yeah, I do. But I now have the choice of, I don't want to have such a big wall with at least my dad. With my mom, like, there's still some things where they're not authority figures for me. They haven't been for a very, 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 very long time. And I don't see that changing. But I'm the one that has the choice because at least I see where the boundaries are and I can decide, okay, nope, this is too much. This is not enough. Here are the things that I'm willing to do and here are the things I'm not willing to do.
So even looking back at the spectrum between disengagement and enmeshment, I mean, obviously there's different characteristics of both. Both are dysfunctional. But I feel like for you, being in a disengaged family, though, that is an act of survival. Not to say that enmeshed wasn't, because we reacted to trauma differently. But I think that in your situation or other people that may be listening that are a part of a disengaged family, it might have been an act of survival. I mean, truly, getting out of a dangerous situation and that's okay. So when we're talking about like balanced families, I'm not saying that, okay, if you're in a disengaged family, you have to work your way to being a balanced family. If it's not for you, it's not for you. And shouldn't try to force anything.
Right. But you also want to look at it and say, is this what I want? Like if family is very important to you, like I know it is for you, spending time with them, taking that time and initiative, if it's really what you want, you've sat with it, that's fine. It's okay for you to want these things to be better. And if they're not, because your family members aren't willing to do their own work that they need and are just not able to meet them where they're at. And one of the things that always comes up during the holidays, and I think even during the different days that we celebrate our parents or whatnot, is there's going to be grief. Like if you have something and you want something else, and you're just like, I'm not going to be able to get that. It's okay for you to feel that pain and that grief. And I felt like before I had my trip with Mama Aya, I certainly felt that. I felt that grief of that loss of a relationship with my dad. And now I've changed. And I mean, we're not talking like every single day, but at least I don't have that same anxiety that I was having before when I'd see his name pop up on my phone. Or I can actually send him a message and be like, hey, I'm thinking of you, just seeing, how you're doing.
Well, just like anything is multi-layered, so is setting boundaries. So I realize even like with individual family members, when I'm thinking about, because I think one of the biggest steps in creating boundaries with someone is understanding what needs are important to you. And so boundaries, I learned, can actually be classified into 4 categories. The first one is physical. And I think that you talk about that too, which is like, what kind of rules do you want to maintain about like your physical body and your personal space? How much distance do you want between you and that other person? What kind of affection are you willing to accept or give to others? And then if you're trying to set a boundary maybe with a partner, which is like, what are your rules about sex and intimacy? The second category is moral. So what are your morals and values and what happens if someone crosses them? The third category is emotional. So can you separate your feelings from other people's feelings? Do you blame yourself if someone is struggling? Do you feel safe to share your feelings freely and without judgment? And how do you relate to people whose beliefs are vastly different than your own? And the last category is financial. What are your guidelines for lending, giving, or donating money to others? Do you plan to jump in and rescue if someone's facing a financial hardship? And what kind of financial support are you willing to accept yourself? So I think by, just reflecting on these, you might find like for example, like I find that, okay, with my mother, for example, I've had to establish financial, emotional, and physical boundaries. So even with one person, there might be several categories or several different boundaries that you need to establish and really think about what is that for me and what does that look like?
That's really interesting. I had not I had not heard of the categories, but I'm intrigued because they're things that just make sense. Like they make total sense. Of course, you're going to have a financial boundary. Of course, you're going to have these emotional, moral, and physical things where, there's the, weird uncle who's casually having racist things at Thanksgiving, and you're just like, what do I do in this situation, right? And yeah, so I mean, just kind of seeing these different things, but you really do have these boundaries in every setting. I would say you have it with your friend group, you have it with your colleagues at work, your schoolmates. Like, all of these things come in. Like, if you're not on the same moral compass, I want to say is probably the best way I can think it. If you're not on the same moral wavelength, it's going to be hard for you to maybe maintain that relationship, or you see that and you go, oh, you know what? This person is actually not my person. And so I had that happen recently at a conference I was at. I had lunch with some women, and there were some things said there that made me think we are not the same. Mm-hmm. And when looking at these items, it was a moral thing for me. It was a moral thing where we were on very different spectrums with some of the things that were happening. And so what I did was I emotionally distanced myself from the conversation. I was ready to pay my part, but a fancy law firm picked it up. So, hey, fancy law firm. And physically was just, I did not engage with them anymore. It was like, yeah, no, we are not the same. Like, so these different boundaries can have different weight in different groups.
Well, and see, you didn't necessarily tell that person why you stopped engaging with them. So what do you think?
It was a big group of women, so I did not say.
So, I mean, at what point do you feel the need to maybe vocalize or establishing these boundaries by setting a hard line in the sand versus just letting a person kind of just drop off your radar?
I think it depends on how important the relationship is, where I would want to engage. And there are a few people who were there that, yeah, I do have relationships with that I will keep. And it makes me weary of other events that I know that certain people would be at, where I'm like, you know what, not my people, not my cup of tea. Like, that's okay. I don't have to like everybody, just like everybody doesn't have to like me. I mean, they should, because I'm fucking amazing, but that's another story for another day, right? Like, I think it really just depends on the relationships. There's some relationships that are worth fighting for and worth working on the good, healthy communication, and others where it's like, all right, bye.
And I think communication is key. I think, expressing, once you have an understanding of what needs and boundaries you need to establish, having a conversation with that person, choosing the space that feels comfortable for you both, using I statements so the other person doesn't feel attacked, and try to invite them in as much to the conversation as possible. If that person continues to cross this boundary, what are the consequences is it that, we're no longer going to engage, or, once you start talking about, this person or this topic, I'm leaving the room. I mean, but being firm with those consequences. And you had mentioned something to me in passing before, which is learning the signs of when a boundary has been crossed. And you had talked about how you listen to your body and how you actually get angry.
I've noticed that it comes out in like an anger, but it's also resentment. Resentment is a key indicator that I've crossed one of my own boundaries of some kind that I've set. And having that awareness, is like, oh, okay, I'm mad about this. It's not necessarily something that you did to me. It's something that I allowed to have happen. And that will definitely give me a clue. But I always go, not always, I try to go inward. I'm not perfect by any means. And so it is something though that I am conscious of, like, let me go inwards, see what it is that this is doing. Same thing with like jealousy. If you're getting jealous of something, like, oh, okay, this is telling me something, not about like what you're doing. It's something that I'm not doing, or something that for whatever reason I feel like, oh, why don't I have that, right? Because I think a lot of people will go through that. So just different indicators and having that self-awareness to be able to really just decide, do I want this? Do I not? Does it serve me?
I like that. I like that you're hitting on a topic, which is usually like what I like to try to tell people is like redefine or refine your strategy. So I use this a lot in my work, but I think that it also applies when setting boundaries. So if you applied a boundary and it's continuously being crossed, you're feeling it in your body, take this as an opportunity to learn, and refine what it is that you want or you need in that relationship. And that may include walking away from the relationship altogether.
And if you do, you're going to be okay.
Absolutely.
Make sure you find us on Instagram at Pivotal Moments HQ for all the behind the scenes and sister-like banter that you know and love. We want to thank our producer and music director, Ron Johnson. This has been an Astronomicus DMR and Pug production.